Good afternoon. You've joined us on Likeable Science. We're filming live here in the Pioneer Plaza, ThinkTech Hawaii studios. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, on Likeable Science. With me today is my favorite guest, Jay Fidell. Many regular viewers, of course, know Jay. And Jay and I are going to be talking today about Micronesia, sort of looking at Micronesia, looking at some of the bigger challenges, issues, a bit of an education lens, but trying to look more broadly too. Jay had some interesting guests on recently who talked about health systems and the problems there, and so we'll probably get into that whole area. So let's actually maybe start right there, Jay. So you had some guests on who had just come back from Majuro and were dismayed about the health care situation.
Yeah, we had Sherry Kagan, we had Art Kuahara, and of course we had Brad Wong, the leader of Aloha Medical Mission. And they went there just a couple weeks ago, and they came back just a few days ago from one of their surgical missions. They have gone, to my knowledge, to Nepal in a couple of places. They have gone to the Philippines over years and years, and in many places. And now, as a new matter, they went to Majuro, and that experience was different from them and for them. And we spoke to them, and they told us about how it was to try to do a humanitarian medical surgical mission in Majuro.
And they said that they were sort of disappointed in the supply, the equipment, the facilities, the people. What were their issues there?
All of the above.
Okay.
They were disappointed in the government and the level of corruption and inaction, and the bureaucracy they found, and they find that in certain degree everywhere they go.
Right.
These are developing countries, but Majuro seems to me, from the observing there and participating in the conversation with them, Majuro seems to be a place that has given up, that everything is like failing. It's the ultimate island failure. And for that reason, I think it's instructive to Hawaii, because islands are different sociological animals, and an island can fail. And that's what's happening, according to this conversation we had.
Well, I think on an odd level that's true, given the fact that Majuro is, all the Marshall Islands are these narrow, flat little atolls that have there's nowhere to go on them. There's no place probably in that country that is more than 200 yards from the ocean. And there's no place in the country more than 10 feet above sea level. So it's very different from Hawaii. We've got a large landmass here. We have mountains that we can retreat to. As sea level rises, it continually damages their country in very severe ways. They already have big floods that wash over periodically, wash over the whole island from side to side, inundating it with salt water, destroying crops, knocking down, rainwater catchment systems. As sea level rises, that's going to become more and more common, and the projections are that within a matter of some decades, those islands are basically going to become uninhabitable. So you've got a country that's looking at essentially that it's going to fall apart and become uninhabitable and eventually disappear beneath the waves within probably the lifetime of people who are living there now. So you're right in an odd sense. They're facing very depressing kinds of futures, and how they react to that is a real challenge, right?
Well, let's roll it back.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about life there in 1946, when James Michener wrote his book, Tales of the South Pacific. It included all these islands. It was quite romantic. It was a culture that you could embrace. It was music and song and moonlight. It was very romantic, and he identified some of these problems too, but they have grown much worse in the intervening, how many years is it? It's quite a few. And the governments have changed. The U.S. got in there and made a lot of changes, many of them useless changes, bad changes. And then U.S. culture came in and made some really awful changes. And so the original culture, the tribal culture that was there, has been really decimated. The food has changed, and now everybody lives on the worst possible food, and they get sick, chronic diseases left and right. They have very bad, you told me, very bad rates of chronic diseases,
Yes.
all of the heart attack, stroke, all that diabetes, really bad. And the health system isn't really taking care of them. It's hard to get doctors to come out there. And you're right, it's just generally depressed. And I mean, there must be many lessons we, Hawaii, as another island community, can learn from what happens in these island communities in the Pacific. But let's talk about your experiences there. You've gone there as a matter of PREL, Pacific Resources, Education and Learning, right here in Pioneer Plaza, a stalwart tenant of Pioneer Plaza, and involved in education all across the Pacific. And you guys have done wonderful work supporting these islands for a long time. So you're on the ground here. You know, you've been there. Tell us about PREL's activities.
Well, so we've largely worked with the education systems in these islands, and there are certainly challenges there. There are odd remnants, hangovers of colonialism that are arguably dysfunctional. The governments there insist that teaching in the schools occur, at least past the 3rd grade, occur in English, and yet teachers themselves do not speak English very well. They are not English. English is not a first language for them. They never particularly learned it very well. The kids don't speak English except in school, and so it's sort of a recipe for failure, particularly when you deal with any technical subjects, to try to explain a subject in a language you don't know to students who don't know that language either. The education systems are struggling. They're underfunded. They are badly underprepared. Many unlicensed teachers, many teachers with very minimal preparation would not be teaching anywhere in the U.S. Nonetheless, there's a tremendous amount of talent and energy and knowledge and wisdom there in the islands that has to be sort of captured and nurtured and fostered, so that if these islands are ever to survive and the cultures are to thrive. And there's tremendous cultural background that should not be sort of tossed aside, should not be forgotten. And there are groups around trying to help recapture that. There are groups now in the Marshall Islands. You see them when you're going there. People building big old-fashioned sailing canoes in the Marshall Islands out of.
Oh, just like Hawaii then.
Right. Yeah.
Trying to recapture the past.
The best parts of it, yes.
Yeah.
And hopefully doing that to also build on the future. And recognize that they no longer live in the past, but there are these changes happening, and they must adjust to them. So it's a very tricky business, right? These cultures have gone through cultural changes in a matter of a few decades that Europe went through in several centuries, and so that's got to, you can see, it's just going to be deeply disruptive. These were very closed, very isolated societies. Many of the smaller islands, everyone knew everyone on that island, and everyone had known everyone on that island for generations, and there were essentially no outsiders. And then the 21st century hit, and their boats come visiting, planes can come visit, the kids get cell phones. Suddenly they're connected to the world, and yeah, it's a very different time, a very different place. Yes, arguably the U.S. government made some bad calls in terms of how they didn't. They gave them fish. They didn't teach them to fish, in a sense, to use that old metaphor.
Right, exactly.
And the islanders are now paying the price, basically, as we want to give them less fish, as it were, now. That is actually almost literally true now in some cases.
When I first came to Hawaii, which was October 1965, my boss in the Coast Guard, he said to me, you can't possibly understand Hawaii until you go to Japan, because it's a large Japanese population. So he said, go to Japan. I'm ordering you. Go to Japan. It's a nice set of orders, Go take a look. My boss was a great guy. So in those days, space available was by cargo planes that were left over from the war, This is only 20 years after the end of the war. And so I got on a C-123 cargo plane where the rivets, would pop out of the skin of the plane while you watched. And we flew at low altitude all across the Pacific. And we stopped at all these places. I got a first-hand look. And one of the places we stopped was, this was not previously populated, this was Wake Island. Wake Island was, in 1965, it was a federal communications place, FAA, I think, FAA, but it was dedicated to communications. And it had a population, mostly of American contractors, of something close to 3,000 people. And a fellow named Doug Olson, who later became a minister here in Hawaii, and ran the Lutheran Church on Kalanianiole Highway, was the minister of Wake Island and sort of the creative and spiritual center of the island. And they had a party when I got there. I was 23 years old. And he invited me. And so I came to hear the discussion. What I learned, it's a long time ago already, what I learned was that islands and island communities are different from the rest of the world. Certainly different than continents. There's a defined number of people. You can't leave. You bounce off each other. They say in Hawaii, it's a small town. You want to make a mess with someone, it'll come back to haunt you. And so the social compact is different than it would be in a larger community. And I learned that well in one day. But I also learned that islands are especially vulnerable. They're vulnerable to notions of cargo cult, which I think you still see in the South Pacific, and notions of paranoia, people coming and taking their island away, and declining cultures with no real prospect of renaissance. And I think Michener saw that in his book, Tales of the South Pacific. So what I'd like to talk with you about, Ethan, is exactly where we are on that continuum. It's not only Majuro. It's many, many places in Michener's travels around the South, and in mine, South Pacific. Beetle nuts doesn't do it anymore. You've got to come into the 21st century. Can you, or are you doomed, is the question.
Right, and places are trying in various ways, with greater or lesser success, that they are trying to promote in some cases things like ecotourism. They are trying to regenerate the copra trade. There are various different mechanisms. Many would argue these are far too small scale, probably too late. Others say, well, it's just the start of something really big, and these places are going to boom. They're beautifully positioned. They're lovely, lovely places. Completely different from most places that somebody from, say, Kansas or Oklahoma will see. If they go to Chuuk or Yap, it's going to be a very special experience for them. And places are promoting it. Places like Palau they're taking great steps to protect their nearshore waters and protect their coral reefs and make themselves a diving capital of the world, which they already are. And Chuuk is doing some of that too. This is all wonderful, and there are great things going on. Chuuk has
Chuuk is truck.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. It's one of the four states.
Pronunciation issue. Okay.
Well, they keep changing names, right? One of the four states of Micronesia. On the main island there, they have an amazing school, Xavier Academy, which has produced many of the leaders of Micronesia and the whole area there. It's a stunningly good school. So it can be done. Places don't have to give up. They can.
What are the bright spots? I mean, I hear you saying that tourism, ecotourism, diving, in some places, not in all places, I'm sure, but in some places that's very attractive and could be, make those islands world famous, world capital for diving. People fly in from everywhere to dive.
Right.
But query, is diving as popular as it was? I know a lot of guys who used to dive, but they don't dive anymore. Is there another generation coming up in the world today that is interested in diving in Chuuk?
That's a good question. I don't know what the trend in scuba is these days. I would imagine it must be growing just because it's an intriguing sport in its own way, and there's an ever larger population. I'd imagine it's going to be picked up by more other groups who will be increasingly tourists the Russians, the Chinese, the Japanese to these areas. So, although I don't know any of the numbers on that.
There's something exotic about a place that's remote. You know, it's hard in our world to find anything remote. The North Woods doesn't work anymore. So maybe you find some of these South Pacific islands, about that big, you know, one coconut tree, whatever, and you have remoteness. You can escape. But my question to you is it really as romantic an escape as it used to be?
Speaking of escapes, we're going to have to escape right now to take a quick break here. You're on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. My guest, Jay Fidell. We're talking about Micronesia and the issues and challenges that they face. We'll be right back.
Ted Ralston, folks, host of our show at ThinkTech Hawaii called Where the Road Leads, where we talk about technology influencing the future of Hawaii. Technology, of course, is the art of solving problems. We always bring in interesting and informed guests who can see from different perspectives and different points of view how that future might unfold and how technology can assist us in getting there. So once again, join us 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock on Fridays. Ted Ralston, your host. And please, if you have ideas that you'd like us to address on this show or folks who you think should be on it, let us know.
Investment?
You're back here on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. With me today in ThinkTech Studios is Jay Fidell, and we're talking about Micronesia and the challenges of Micronesia that they face and the opportunities there too. Jay was just asking about the options for getting away there, and indeed they are. They're great. There's probably no place on Earth where you're going to find more little remote spots, basically, where you can truly get away, even in this day and age, further away from civilization than almost anywhere else.
But it's not as if the Shangri-La Hotel has a beautiful hotel out there with a fabulous restaurant and gardens.
Right.
Not like that.
That is true. There are not too many places like that.
So if I went as a tourist, say, I mean, you've been there,
right?
And I wanted to, take my wife and have a sort of getaway experience, and do the tropical paradise thing. Seeking the tropical paradise made famous by Hawaii and also the Caribbean and so. Would I be able to find that, or would I find a lot of trash in the backyard?
It would really depend, I think, on where you went. There are places where it's relatively undeveloped still. Yap sort of stands out in my mind as being perhaps the least developed spot that I've seen. Some small, quaint hotels in a very quiet little village-type town that turns out to be the capital of the country. Other places I've seen, yes, the first thing you notice is the plastic bags blowing around on the streets, and very, very disturbing to see that. Sort of the worst aspects of American culture have surfaced without seemingly the great aspects. So it's tricky, and I'm by no means an expert. I've traveled only very quickly and briefly to a relatively few spots there. Know nothing about really the true South Pacific, that is south of the equator. And there are many other spots down there. But yes, these places I think do have properties that make them valuable. They make them commodities that are not going to be found elsewhere in the world, and the people who are in charge of them should learn to maximize those opportunities.
Isn't that true? Yeah. So what about getting there? Strikes me that getting there wasn't easy for me back in 1965. It was a zigzag across the ocean. It was beautiful to see so much ocean, and to see these islands coming at you across the horizon. It was fabulous. It was very romantic. But I wonder now. These people take vacations. They want to get there in 4 hours, no matter where it is, and they don't want to spend their time on a plane. They don't want to spend their time in transit. But I'm wondering if that's possible. I mean, a quick trip kind of, is that possible in the Pacific Islands?
Well, again, the flight that I'm most familiar with is called the Island Hopper, which goes from Honolulu to Majuro, and that's a 5-hour leap.
Direct.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Every 3 weeks.
There's nothing. No,
only kidding.
No, it goes several times a week.
Okay.
There's nothing in between here in Majuro, basically, except ocean. And then from Majuro, it takes a series of basically little 1-hour hops, one to Kwajalein, one to Koshrai, one to Pohnpei, one to Chuuk, and then goes on to Guam. Then if you want to get to Yap and Palau, you have to sort of go back from Guam, go on down. So it's this little bounce kind of thing. These little 1-hour hop flights, 40-minute flights between these spots. Not tremendously romantic. It's a regular 737 or whatever, plane, standard commercial jets. But there's a lot of places that aren't served. That just hits the big islands.
Sure. That's just economics.
Right. One of the places that, for instance, asked for my help in my project Water for Life is a place called Kapinga Maringi, which is the southernmost part of Pohnpei. And that I would have to spend basically 4, 5, 6 days on a ship out of Pohnpei to get down there, only to stay for a couple of days and then spend another 4 to 6 days coming back on a ship. And
What a trip.
I couldn't make that make sense. It's so much time and energy for helping a relatively tiny.
No, but it must be a great adventure to have a job as you do, to go to places like that and take it. It's going through the looking glass. It's a whole new world out there, and it's unavailable to the jet traveler.
There's amazing spots there. Get on a little boat and travel across the Chuuk Lagoon to a little low island, Peace Panau I was on, and talked to the people in that community, and the whole community sort of came out and celebrated our arrival and prepared a little feast for us, and it was wonderful. Dances and music and song. Of course, they had boom boxes and odd things like that. So it wasn't
really.
Yeah, it wasn't really.
High tech finds its way.
Right. But then there is a sort of the decay you were talking about too. That is, we found, I was there to look at rainwater catchment systems, and there are big rainwater catchment systems that are cracked and broken and sort of irreparably damaged and are not going to be fixable, and other ones that are leaking and just in poor repair. People aren't using them properly, and it's not draining off the roof correctly. The gutters will leak, and for areas that depend so much on rainwater, that's a serious issue. So I'm trying to help them engage the communities in learning about water and how to keep water clean and all that kind of those sorts of good things. Increasingly important as the climate changes and groundwater is less and less available there. So,
well, it sounds like if you're looking for one word to define our conversation today, it's a word you used at the very beginning. It's the word dependency. It's probably the fault of the United States, but we weren't very sensitive in the way we approached this problem after the war. But the reality is we have created, and there now is a society that is completely dependent on everything from the U.S. and a vulnerable society that's completely dependent. So the result is really not very good.
Right. So it's one of the things we're pushing in our education work, is to try to get this idea of resiliency and self-sustaining cultures back, to help people understand, you did live on your own, as self-sustaining countries that supported X number of people without any outside help for centuries. So that can happen again. It's really just a matter of sort of refocusing energy, taking advantage now of some of the new technologies that can really help promote that. Solar power is becoming cheaper and more reliable, and sunshine's in plentiful supply down there. The water issues, perhaps, again, in combination with solar power, perhaps can be dealt with by solar power desalination. Desal is not always economically feasible everywhere, but when you have an excess of solar power, that may be an equation you can work out. Yeah. And yes, then you've got these beautiful places. You're not going to be importing oil and diesel fuel and all that kind of stuff. You've got to reestablish the whole dietary issues and get away from the rather wretched diets that so many people got onto after post-World War II.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I mean, so that's kind of it's a canary in the coal mine. If you find people eating their authentic foods, their cultural foods that they grew on the land way back when, that they survived as a people before anyone came, that's going to be consistent with better health. It's it's going to be what they're used to, I mean, anatomically. But if you find that all of that is gone and replaced with McDonald's, which I think it is, that's the conversation a couple of days ago, that it's all McDonald's. That's the worst possible food in the world, especially if it's a regular diet. So, do we suggest, do we want, are you advocating that we go back to the earlier way of growing food, and, you know, get rid of the fast foods, get rid of the high starches and all that? And if you do advocate that, how do we achieve that? Because, as you said, the water is rising over the land and leaving salt. It's not arable if that's happening, right? So how do you get back to the cultural foods?
Yeah, no, it's a very tricky issue, and it's got to be a discussion and decision based in those cultures. The people in those cultures have to decide they want to do that it's in their own best interest to do it. It's in the best interest of their children, the best interest of their land. And yes, they can, to some extent, do it. You can build raised beds. Again, if you are very careful with your water and conserve it, you can rinse salt out when the salt comes into your water, into your land. You can, using modern technologies, you can get salt-resistant crops, versions of taro and all that will tolerate being at least a brief inundation by the ocean. There are a variety of things you can do, but we cannot go and say to them, this is the way to do it. We can only go and sort of say, you know, let's work together and let's figure out what you want to do and how you want to do it, basically.
Have we been doing that? I mean, on a sort of systemic scale? Because what I took from the discussion a couple of days ago on Majuro was that billions have been funneled in from the American government in order to give them a better society, and billions have been funneled out the back door to graft and corruption. So it never gets to the guy on the street. It never gets to do what it was intended to do. Is this a matter of conversation when you go there?
I think it is recognized that there is a good deal of dysfunctional government, certainly there, that wastes money, that gets projects going and then drops them, that pays off contractors who are not doing the jobs or doing them wrong. And it's very sad because the needs are so big there. And we have, you know, true obligations there, particularly in the Marshalls, where, you know, we essentially took over several of the atolls, set off hydrogen bombs, essentially completely destroying.
It's another big issue.
The whole sets of freestanding cultures, basically. They're displacing those people onto other atolls where they had to sort of find their way and fit in, and leaving huge numbers of people with devastating health problems. The cancer rates among Marshallese are appalling. So we can't get away from those obligations. Yes, I agree with you in the sense that they need sort of the best possible government, good government that really works well. They had traditional leadership they still want and respect, and they've got this other government on top of it that was sort of layered in there, and it's not clear to me how those two always work together very effectively. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's easy. If you're insensitive, it's easy to mangle a vulnerable culture, just make a real mess out of it. And I mean, just to go back also to your point about the nuclear testing, it was an enormous. There was something like 70 bombs that were blown up.
Yes.
And I don't mean underground. I mean above ground,
right
here in these atolls, and people were exposed. And there were cases where they would blow up the bombs and not think much about wind direction, and the cloud would come over. This is part of the discussion on Wednesday. The cloud would come over, and this kind of white soot would come down out of the sky. People had no idea what it was, but it was ruining their lives at that very moment.
Right. Yeah.
And then they come up with a fantastic array of cancer.
Right.
For that generation anyway.
Yeah.
And nobody did anything about it. They don't have the medical facilities now to deal with it, and it's really killing them.
Yeah. When I was staying in Majuro, my first visit, I was surprised right across the parking lot of my hotel, there was the U.S. Agency for International Health or something, whole body counting center, which I was sort of surprised to see sort of right across the street from my hotel, you know, a place that essentially was doing whole body scans on people's, you know,
See what went wrong.
yeah, on their radiation load basically they had taken. Just devastating stuff. Huge challenges.
No amount of money would actually compensate them for what happened there. I mean, it was really, it destroyed everything that they had. Not only the bombs, but the, you know, the invasive culture, call it. But you know what I think? I think at this point, Ethan, because of the weight and the gravity of the discussion we're having, you might consider taking a break.
That was, Jay, you're reading my mind. You're here on Likeable Science with my humorous guest, Jay Fidell. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, and we'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Seymour Kazimirski. I have a show called Seymour's World on ThinkTech Hawaii. Our show is about opening minds and facilitating conversations. To tell you the truth, I have no idea what we're going to be talking about. I have no idea who our guests are going to be, but I guarantee you we're going to have lots and lots of fun. Aloha from Seymour's World.
And you're back on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. You're here on ThinkTech Hawaii, talking with Jay Fidell. We're talking about Micronesia, the interesting issues, challenges, and opportunities that Micronesia offers, what they're facing in the future, what they've come from in the past. And we're going to look a little bit, we've been talking about education, we've talked a little bit about health issues. Let's talk a little business now, Jay. You wanted to push onto that?
Well, you know, it reminded me when we had the conversation a few days ago, they talked about, you know, trying to make deals, and it was very hard to do that because the money would evaporate, go into somebody's pocket who wasn't entitled, or worse, that there was no ethic to actually comply with the agreement or the rule or the statute, whatever it was, that it was, you know, catch as catch can. And this is very problematic for an investor or any company that wants to get into contracts. Also, there was the possibility that the legislature, the government presumably supervises and maintains good order and discipline, was not reliable to an outside party. So you want to have a contract with the government, that's, you know, don't count on that either. And I can tell you from my own experience as a lawyer, representing clients who were trying to do business in this area of the Pacific, they couldn't. They found that the contracts would drop out from under them, that their contracting parties would do very bizarre things and you know, take things from, just stop it and take the gear, take the equipment, whatever it was. Well, the government would abrogate the contract in favor of their friends who were taking the gear. It was impossible to get justice there. There was no court system to speak of where a businessman could enforce a contract, or for that matter, a rule, a government rule. And so, in a number of cases that I saw, the contracting parties from Hawaii swore they'd never do any business there again. This has to have a salient effect going forward.
This brings it back to what we were talking about shortly before we began the show. It was, sometimes it seems like Hawaii hasn't really done enough in the region to be a leader, and yet in some sense, perhaps when they've tried to do things and tried to lead them into business deals, that they've been rather, people who've done that have been rather badly burned. And after a few times being burned, of course, you get pretty leery about reaching in anymore. It's an issue. Again, I don't know the solution. If I knew the solution, I'd be somebody in charge, probably.
It's just a matter of people looking forward and not looking at their toenails all the time.
Right, but
you know, if you want to enjoy the benefits of being a 21st century place, then you've got to, you know, abide by your contracts, and you can't do, you know, this kind of irresponsible compliance. And the problem is, it has a secondary effect. That if, say, my client's not going to do business anymore there, and if my client tells other people, don't do business there anymore, how are they going to get anything done? The only way they can get anything done is the federal government comes in and bails them out by contracting itself in Washington, you know, and sending that contracting party out to do the job. This is the second best solution.
Yeah, and I mean, in a sense, all that's doing is continuing the sort of culture of dependency that we spoke of earlier.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think part of this is the fact that a lot of these places do have these, and I mentioned earlier, these sort of dual governments. They have their traditional leadership structure that has never really been taken away, and then they have this sort of artificial U.S. democracy sort of plastered in on top of it, and it leaves tensions. People don't respect one another's positions. They figure this is all sort of short-term stuff. So yes, get it while you can. It leads to very bad things. I think somehow there needs to be more deep sort of national conversations in these areas about who they are, what they want to do going forward. You know, what form the government should take, how they can better integrate their various factions, and this happens more successfully in some places than in others. Palau, for instance, does a whole lot better in some sense than does the Marshall Islands. They have better infrastructure there.
Palau was out here about a year and a half ago. They sent a delegation out here to try to rustle up some business with Hawaii companies. I was very impressed with that. They wanted to meet with people, they wanted to make deals, they wanted to have people visit them, and they were trying real hard to, you know, show that they meant it and that they would follow through on their word and all that.
At the same time, we were talking with one of our colleagues in Palau who runs a sort of a technical business, and he has to hire many of his staff from, for instance, the Philippines, because there still aren't people in Palau trained, educated at this level. So they still face these same kind of things. But I think there's perhaps some lessons to be learned from Palau. I mean, they have their own peculiar problems. They built a whole state government complex that just is completely dysfunctional. But that's a whole other story.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that some of these guys from Palau, they had gone to good schools on the mainland. Their kids were going to good schools on the mainland. They seemed to be successful, and you really wonder about whether that experience, whether the common folk on the street had the same experience, or whether the guys in the government had a specific advantage.
They've set up links, for instance, to the University of South Pacific, so they can get students funneled down there. Particularly, they're trying to do this in the area of medicine, so they'll get people who can graduate from college in Palau and have the academic strength to go to medical school at the University of South Pacific and then come back to Palau, and they're trying to build their sort of human capital, their own capacity, and that's really, I mean, that's, I think, hugely got to be the focus for all these areas. The sort of human infrastructure is a vital part of the system that's sort of missing. They just, and again, this gets back to the education systems being, you know, not as strong as they need to be. They're not getting enough of their people well enough educated. People can't really get go on to higher education. They can't get the training they need. A lot of the well-educated people end up leaving because they see there's no place for them there anymore. Too, once they've sort of gotten a good education, they realize they can go off somewhere else and make money and live a successful life.
And why go back? You know, I mean, if I'm a smart guy and I get into a school, whatever kind of scholarship I can rustle up and go to Stanford and learn PhD things, I'm not likely to go back.
Right, and so more, you know, I think more of this has to be a matter of discussion about priority. How do you make your country not just accessible to, but enjoyable to, believable in, so people who will go off, get the education they need, come back, help educate the next generation. You begin to build your capacity internally in that way. And
it sounds like, because we're in a new time, they have to restructure the country. They have to reinvent it.
Exactly.
They have to sit together and say, who are we? What are we doing here? How are we going to sustain the next generation? How are we going to build? How are we going to attract trade, make some money, be less dependent, live reasonable lives and all that?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like they're doing that, but I mean, I think one solution could be just that. And maybe it needs a kind of facilitator. Maybe you are a facilitator,
well,
Ethan. You know?
Thanks.
Because you're in the middle of education, which is so critical in this.
I think education does lie very much at the center of this, and I think it must. I mean, that's got to be where everything pivots around in some sense. And I mean, they are caught, to use the old metaphor, that it is as if it's a 1910 Ford Model T, and they're trying to convert this to a 747 while rattling down a muddy road, you know. And that's a very tough transition to do.
It takes a lot of work. I mean, we know transformations are expensive and difficult, and they create all kinds of tension.
Right.
I mean, look at the energy transformation here in Hawaii. I mean, people think, oh, it'll just happen. Well, it doesn't just happen. You have to work at it.
And implementation dip.
You
know, when you try those new systems, they always, for a while, everything goes down. The productivity drops when you do those. Yeah, it's very challenging.
So we here in Hawaii, I think in the days of Michener, we had, you know, a certain avuncular quality. We were the cloth mother for the South Pacific. They had to come here. They had to resupply somehow. Even back to Captain Cook, you know. we were the headquarters model of all those smaller islands down there. And that was an important role to play for our ships, our people, our business people, and so. But I don't think we're doing that anymore. I think we've given that up as you know, not profitable, not productive. And it seems like there's a moral issue there that does Hawaii, you know, Hawaii has the same risks. If all the smart kids left Hawaii and went to Stanford and took PhD stuff, would they come back? Well, a lot of them don't come back. And every time one doesn't come back, we lose something, and we go down a hill somehow. So we're not in the same way, not in the same degree, but we have the same island process happening. And query whether we ought to take responsibility, and more than just, you know, accepting them as unfunded liabilities is what we're doing because of Congress. Maybe we ought to take a more affirmative role, not only by way of PREL, but other organizations too.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's critical to watch that sort of stuff. What is happening to your human capital? Is it draining away? I mean, I suspect in Hawaii there's always going to be new infusions, because it's a place a lot of people want to come to, and you know, so there's infusions from Micronesia, there's infusions from the mainland U.S. always to here. Yeah, those smaller island states are not, I think, not destinations for people, and so when their capital drains away, that's very serious for them. So they face an even greater challenge. But we do face the same thing. How do we attract and keep the best and the brightest here? Because we need them desperately. I mean, we do face ultimately the same challenges. We are a small island a long way from nowhere else, and we need to be developing our own self-sustainability. We need to be developing our resiliency to handle storms, tsunamis, whatever natural disaster comes.
Sea change.
Right, yeah, exactly. So it's, and hopefully we should take on that role of being a leader in the Pacific and helping both model and share our knowledge with others in the best possible way, where people can learn from what we do right, learn from what we do wrong. And you're right, I don't see enough of that happening.
I don't think the state does anything really. I mean, it does what it has to do because of federal mandates, but it doesn't actually affirmatively go out there and try to. And I was impressed that the Aloha Medical Mission went and did this, because in fact there were a lot of people that needed medical care.
Huge needs. The quality of the water in Majuro is appalling. 2/3 of the rainwater catchment systems in a recent survey there had unacceptable levels of coliform bacteria. You just know, I mean, those waterborne diseases are just going crazy there. And you know, why is this? I mean, they have a municipal water system, but it only works part of the time. It actually gets contaminated by people illegally tapping into it. Got huge problems, but you know, we don't exactly have those same problems here. What is it that we can teach to them, and how can we help them discover their own solutions, the solutions that'll work well for themselves? You know, it's truly a challenge.
It's all about education, really. It's the key to the future.
I do think education lies right at the heart of the whole thing, from educating mothers to neonatal care, right on through educating older adults and everyone in between. It's just that's gonna help people survive, thrive, sustain themselves.
So can we give them more? Can Prel give them more? Can the state or the country give them an education on, what did you say before, we teach them how to fish in every way rather than give them fish?
Yeah, exactly. It's very much helping them discover their own abilities to fish even, helping them realize they know how to fish. They maybe have forgotten some of this, and yes, maybe we can help them with some of the newer fishing techniques, as it were, but that's really, yeah, it's not a patriarchal, we are giving to them. It's a mutual discovery of let's all figure out how we all sustain our small islands on this big watery planet here, in the face of rising seas. And
so at the end of the show with Aloha Medical Mission, I asked them, you guys, you choose places, you go and you take, very capable, competent surgeons out there to do surgery, and you have 3 or 4 places that you like. Are you going to go back to Majuro? And in one voice, they all said no. It was just too many challenges. They didn't get a chance to do the good work they had come to do. So I say to you, I know you'll go back. You'll go back with Prel.
Right.
But if it wasn't Prel, would you go back? And should I go? Should I take my wife? Should I go on the beach with the palm trees and the coconuts?
So there are beautiful spots there, absolutely. They're wonderful things, and I remain optimistic that Majuro and the rest of the Pacific Islands will survive and will thrive. But yes, we all need to be working with them. And that basically brings us to the end of our time here, unfortunately. This has been a fun conversation, Jay. I very much have enjoyed our talk here today, and I thank you for your good insights, as usual.
Thank you, Ethan.
We're finishing up Likeable Science here, and I hope you'll join us on our next show.